This week's podcast is sponsored by MPB. Trade in and upgrade your setup for the perfect shoot every time, or free up funds for the gear you no longer need. MPB is the fast, easy and secure way to buy and sell camera equipment. MPB pays for insured collection of your kit and delivers free when you trade in, and has a free 6-month warranty on all purchases. Visit mpb.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Monday the 18th of March, and joining me on this edition is Steve Withers.
Then at lunch she got drunker, and finally she became Joan Collins.
Ed Selley.
Excessive masturbation.
And our special guest, Ricky Jennings.
How could I ruin myself?
And welcome along to another podcast. Yes, we have a special guest this week, and this is something over the next 12 months we hope to improve on. I'm not saying Ricky's a bad guest, he's just the first one, but this is something that we want to add into the podcast, is get certain guests in the industry, in certain areas of the industry, along to talk about various hot topics that are the talk of the town at this moment in time. So Ricky, just tell us a little bit about yourself. I think forum members will be aware of you under the Calibrate name, but maybe you can just tell people what you do.
Yeah, I run a audio visual company. We install as well as calibrate various systems. Do a lot with projectors and home cinema. I've been calibrating for probably about over 15 years now. Company's been running nearly 10 years. And yeah, we do a lot with projector systems, JVC, Epson and Sony mainly.
Okay, so for transparency, people should just bear in mind this evening when you are talking about products that you sell, there is a little bit of bias in there because you do sell the products, and obviously you do that because you think they're good products.
Exactly. I try and be as impartial as possible. I have no sway against any manufacturer, I would say. So different projectors for different requirements.
Okay, good stuff. So that's Ricky. Pointless me asking you what you did all last week because we don't have any context for that. But Steve's here. Steve, I haven't heard from you in a week, so you must have been doing something interesting.
Was I? Did a calibration, went to see Captain Marvel, did some work. That's about it, really.
And work wasn't interesting. You haven't looked at anything interesting product-wise?
No, it's, not exactly, no. It's more been a case of rewriting stuff I've already seen.
The life of a freelancer.
Which is really boring.
Freelance gold.
Yeah. Which is really boring. Yeah. It's lucrative, but boring.
There you go. Right, so we're going to have to follow on Ed then for something interesting. Ed's always good for something interesting.
Oh, God. Well, I bought more tyres. I'm hoping it's like Cafe Nero, and if I buy 10, I might get some free. I don't know, but
I thought isn't your car going back soon?
No, not until February.
Oh,
and whilst it's on those gambles where you think, well, it's nearly slicks, so if we have a dry spell, it's going to be super grippy. But obviously, the weather being what it has been the last couple of days, I think that's probably a bit of a gamble. Otherwise, I, like Steve, have been working, although unlike Steve, annoyingly, and actually this is me being slack rather than anything else, everyone for whom I do work for is getting fresh and original content, which is really time consuming and involves lots of boxes. So I won't be making that mistake.
Nice to know.
I went down to Hampshire this weekend, saw my parents, which is always very pleasant. I went to the Milestones Museum in Basingstoke, and obviously most people would quite justifiably do what you can to avoid Basingstoke. It's not particularly exciting, and my apologies if you live there, or indeed my commiserations, but the Milestones Museum was really good. It's got lots of historical objects pertaining to Hampshire and the surrounding regions, and it's sort of set up as a sort of high street. And one of the things there is a shop full of old televisions and radiograms, and it does remind people and myself that we've come an awful long way. I stuck a photo of one particularly large and imposing television on my Instagram, if you're that desperate. And that was all very pleasant. And I drove back today, and there was a gentleman in a BMW 123D, and I was really impressed at how determined he was to get away from me.
Oh,
I mean,
dear.
the fact that I had my son with me meant I wasn't going to do anything. But he blasted off into the middle distance on a country road and then just span it really, really badly about a mile down the way. And I was like, I had to sort of come up and go, "Are you all right?" I went, "Yeah." It's like, well, have a nice day. So yeah, I have said this before. I will not buy another hot hatch in a colour specific to that hot hatch because it is like a red rag to a bull, or in this case, a blue rag. I won't be doing that again. But
I used to get that all the time in my Audi S3 because it was Sepang blue. So the traditional Audi colour. It's either grey or the blue, and you always had the boy racers hanging off your bumpers or challenge you at the lights and all that. See in the Mustang, nobody gives you any of that shit. They take one look and it's like, yeah, okay.
It's all about endurance. It's sort of endurance for the Mustang. I'd just chase after you at a steady 56 miles an hour and overtake you after 9 hours. So,
when I run out of fuel.
Both if that's the race.
Well, we'll see. Actually, no, I found this out. This isn't something a dig at your a hybrid, Steve, because I think yours is better engineered than this. But a large German company's hybrid saloons, if you have a software problem and the battery dips below 5%, because the software won't let that happen, the battery can't be charged up again by the user. It has to be taken out at a dealer's and reset at a cost of lots. So that's all very. I thought that was quite amusing. So don't do that.
What do you drive, Ricky?
I've got a nice Citroen Berlingo van now. So
one of the
exactly
fastest vehicles known to man.
Exactly.
I have seen it's the spiritual successor to the Astromax. I have seen Berlingos, doing sub 7-minute laps of the Nürburgring kind of pace a lot of the time around Milk.
It was a bit of a shock going from a Seat Leon Cooper R down to that, but unfortunately, needs must. So yeah, that's what I drive now.
Okay, well at least you're doing it for your business. I still don't know why Steve's gotten in a hybrid. Steve, why you got a hybrid?
Because he's old.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do more bit to save the planet.
Yeah.
What, by buying a car made out of rare earth metals from all four corners of it?
And powered by electricity.
Well, sometimes.
Yeah.
Only intermittently.
Yeah, only rarely when I'm in town.
Yeah, right. So I had an interesting day today. We ended up arguing about discount codes in a 50s diner.
Well, they didn't have discount codes in the 50s.
And you called me old.
It's one of these strange things because obviously we go there for the car club when the season starts in next month. It starts next month. But anyway, we're down doing a photo shoot for an event that we're holding in the summer, so it's a bit of a promotional thing. And on the way back, we said, right, well, let's stop at the diner and we can have early tea or whatever. And just meant I could come back here and do the podcast. I didn't have to be faffing on making food or anything like that. So we stopped at the diner where we normally do. We all got discount cards. Sat down at the table and came in as a 5, and then we said to the lass, it'll be separate checks, but we've all got our own discount cards. And she says, yeah, that's fine. And then she came back and says, because you came in as 5, you can't use your discount cards.
Right.
Exactly.
Now, so what does that mean? If you'd come in individually and presented cards and then sat at the same table, would that have been allowed?
I have no idea.
The rules of the game not explained.
I have no idea what she meant by that at all. And then she started mentioning the car club, and we were like, "Why are you mentioning the car club? We're in for lunch. We're sitting together, but it's separate checks, and we've all got our own discount cards." And she says, "No, you're all sitting as a 5, so I can't do it." It's like, so
what if you have used your discount card?
Well, she went away to speak to her manager, and then came back and said, "We can give 4 of you a discount, but one of you has to pay full price." At which point we said, "We'll pay for the drinks, and we'll go to the restaurant up the road," and that's what we did. It was a bit bizarre, I've got to say, and I still don't understand her argument at all. So. Avoid OK Diners on the A19. If you've got a discount card and there's 5 of you and you've all got discount, I still don't understand the argument. There you go.
Well, I mean, this is just shows what my future has ahead of me as I gain in years. I'll be in for the early bird special and be gutted that I don't get my OAP discount. Let's be clear about this. It happens to us all, and at times I make no apologies for the fact that at times I behave like I'm older than you. I don't have a problem with that. I accept it, but in me accepting it, you need to accept it too. Sorry.
Okay. I think it's time to move on and do a podcast, but before we do that, there's competitions. There's a hell of a lot to get through here, so I'm going to avoid the one who's drinking. Steve, do you want to go through the current competitions?
Yes, sure. Right, so far you can win a copy of Bohemian Rhapsody on 4K Ultra HD. That competition closes on the 20th of March. You can win a copy of Overlord, which I recommend highly. You can win that on Blu-ray, and that closes also on the 20th of March. You can win a copy of Sink the Bismarck on Blu-ray, and that closes on the 22nd of March. So you're going to have to be pretty fast on these first three competitions, given that this podcast goes up on the 18th. And then you can win a copy of Peterloo on Blu-ray. Less keen on that one, looks a bit worthy. That closes on the 25th of March. You win a copy of Slaughterhouse Rules on Blu-ray. That also closes on the 25th of March. You can win a copy of Submergence on Blu-ray. I haven't heard of that, which closes on 25th of March. And you can win a copy of Wheels on Meals on Blu-ray. I haven't heard of that either. And that closes on 29th of March. All competitions are open to eligible AVF members resident in the UK, except, as always, for the employees, which in this case means Phil.
Right, I think the Wheels on Meals, I think that's Jackie Chan, I think. Let me just double check that, because, you know, Kaz has reviewed it for the site.
Obviously.
It's not like, yeah, Jackie Chan, it's one of his things, and it's gotten the Eureka treatment, so seemingly it scored a 9 from Kaz, so there you go.
It's got a silly title.
He can be a bit generous towards niche.
You're just saying that because he's not here.
Films. Well, I'd be prepared to state categorically that Mr. Harlow can be a bit generous when it comes to niche Southeast Asian films.
Okay. Have you seen Slaughterhouse Rules yet, Steve?
I have not seen Slaughterhouse Rules, but it does look quite funny. It did look funny in the trailer, at least. It might be that all the gags are only in the trailer and there's nothing else in the film, but Simon Pegg's usually worth a watch.
Well, I didn't realise that it was actually him and Nick Pegg's own company that made it. It's the first feature film that they've made together. As
Nick Frost.
Yeah.
Nick Frost.
What did I say?
You said Nick Pegg.
Did I?
Yeah, which is interesting because obviously you were thinking Nick Frost, Simon Pegg, and said Nick Pegg, but Nicholas Pegg is actually the guy who does the voice of the voice of the Daleks from Doctor Who, and also wrote a really seriously, Nicholas Pegg, look it up, his complete Bowie book. Everything you ever wanted to know about David Bowie is in that book. It's really well written too. It's a really good book. I recommend it to any Bowie fan.
Let this be a warning to you, Phil. Don't make mistakes again because you're setting off.
Yeah, I won't. Sorry.
Who knows where he's going next? Also, obviously, for those competitions, it goes without saying this is being recorded on the 17th. You only have a for a couple of those. So, oh, right, fine.
You weren't listening to me.
I just dial you out. You just calibration noise, mate.
Previous competition winners. There's quite a few to get through.
There's a few at last. So, Drongo, he or she was lucky enough to win the Mission QX2 speakers worth £299, and based upon Ed's comments, that's a massively good prize.
Yep.
Gazaman won the Yamaha Music Cast 50 speakers, also worth £399, and Ed, you reviewed those too, and I believe they're very good.
Yeah, that's all right.
Foster 1984 won a copy of Opera on Blu-ray. Stephen 9709 won a copy of A Star Is Born on Blu-ray, and Lycan Gav won a copy of Schindler's List on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, so that'll be a laugh a minute for you. You watched that once, and I'm not going to say Schindler's List. Yes, you'll probably watch that once and maybe not a second or third time because.
Well, congrats anyway. You know, you want a prize.
But a great film and a really good 4K disc. Lovely 4K restoration on that. Really good use of black and white, obviously with a little bit of colour in that specific scene. But yeah, excellent prizes all round, and congratulations to everybody.
Okay, so that's competitions. We'll be back with hardware in a sec. Right, okay, so hardware stuff, and the reason Ricky is on, so we're going to talk a little bit about calibration, we're going to talk about projectors specifically, because this is Ricky's expertise, as well as HDR, and I think HDR and projectors is a really a difficult subject to broach, I think, because certainly from myself and Steve's point of view when it comes to reviewing these things, what we can't do is we can't go and load different parameters into the projector, which you can do with certain models like the JVCs, Ricky, where you can come up with your own HDR curves and so on and load them into the projectors and so on.
Got JVC and Sony as well.
Yeah, so this is stuff that we can't do when we review them, because we have to review the product as the product is sold, and as somebody would get that product. So just take people through that side of things, because it's something that we don't cover within the reviews, but I do think it's a little bit interesting in terms of loading profiles onto the projectors and how it's actually done.
Yeah, well, what we would do, both JVC and Sony have their own external software. You've got Image Director for the Sony, and JVC have their own AutoCal. Because projectors weren't really designed for HDR, we're lucky to get between 100 and 200 nits out of them, and we're trying to squeeze sort of maybe 1,000, maybe 4,000 nits into that small nit level. So we would use the external software to create basically a curve which will retain some of the detail at the top end, which if you were following the OTF strictly, you would clip an awful lot of detail at the top end. So you use these curves to try and resolve the bottom end, but also the top end information. So for example, when you're looking at the sky, you're looking at clouds, rather than just being a white blob, there's some detail to them. So we would design a curve based on the nit level of the projector in the room, and you would look at having a different kind of roll off at the top end, the bottom end, to try and resolve some of that extra detail. You're not potentially going to get the sort of spectacular highlights you get out of a TV, because you just don't have the nit level, but you're trying to resolve as much detail without making the image look either washed out or too dark, and that's where projectors can struggle, especially out of the box, being especially dark, especially with 4,000 nit titles. Sometimes they can look overly dark, which can take away from the enjoyment of the film. So yeah, we use the external software to create these curves based on the environment and upload them. Okay,
so obviously by manipulating it like that, you are going to lose quite a bit of brightness, because obviously what the projector wants to do is it wants to follow the PQE or TF curve. It clips detail. If you're then trying to resolve the detail, you're taking some of the dynamics out of that, because you're taking some of the brightness out. So how do you compensate for that?
You would go above it. You would add more brightness into the EOTF. So what you're trying to do with a projector, if you were to follow the EOTF strictly, you would either have a situation where you were clipping all the highlights at the top. You would literally be getting an SDR image without any of the highlights, because SDR is designed to be around the 120 nit mark. The alternative to that is to allow some tone mapping at the top, so allow some roll off, so you don't take away too much from the SDR, but you allow some of that detail to come through at the top without having the real spectacular bright highlights.
Yeah. So I guess what you're actually doing is you're redesigning the tone map, which is basically in essence what the Panasonic Blu-ray players are doing now, the 4K Blu-ray players. So their HDR optimizer that's exactly what it's doing. It's doing the tone map in the projector, in the player, to the capability of the display, so in this case the projector, which means the projector doesn't need to do as much. So it's another way of doing what you're describing there.
It is. The only caveat to that is it's the Panasonic Blu-ray player. It doesn't cover all the other sources, and that's the real issue with it. You can't use that. And the Panasonic players also, I mean, while they've got the apps on there for Netflix and Amazon Prime, they obviously don't do it at the correct refresh rate. So there's the caveat to it. So you end up potentially using an Apple TV, maybe a console as well, things like that, and they won't have that benefit, which is why although I agree with the Panasonic player, and that is a good way of doing it, you also need the HDR modes within the projector for the other sources.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one of these really difficult areas, Steve, that as projector owners and lovers, and I still love a reflective image, I think it just has that cinematic look that you don't get from a direct display like a TV, like an OLED or so. I mean, OLED gets close, but it still doesn't have that it's hard to describe in words, but that cinematic look.
That sense of, plus also, there's also the size. When we're talking about projected image compared to a TV, even a big TV is never going to compete with a big projected image, and you get that sense of being, in a cinema, which I guess is what the content creator, the director, designed it to be seen that way, not to be seen on a TV. So that's cool. Like Ricky was saying, the problem with HDR on a projector is that a projector can only do 100 to 200 nits, and obviously even the lowest nit value on a peak nit value on a HDR content is 1,000 nits, and some stuff is being masked at 4,000 nits. Although I've noticed less and less so these days. It seems to be 1,000 nits is becoming the more common peak brightness target. But even then, even at 1,000 nits, you're still trying to cram 1,000 nits down to 1 to 200 nits. And as Ricky has said, you can get clipping in the whites. But from my experience, the biggest problem is usually that the image just looks too dark. It's because if it's following the EOTF precisely, or as precisely as it can within its limitations, then what it ends up doing is it ends up scaling everything down. So that peak, which may only be occasionally within a film, it's peaking at 1,000 nits, but because it's trying to use that as the peak for its tone map, that means that everything else has got to get crushed down into 100 nits or less, and suddenly the image looks very dark. A film that I've recently seen, which was a good example, that was Overlord, which takes place almost entirely at night, bar the last 20 minutes, and they push it in the grade too. They really push it in terms of if you watch it on an OLED, for example, it looks great, but it is a deliberately dark film because it's taking place at night or in poorly lit buildings. On a projector, that can be a real test, because having to tone map that down to the projector's inherent brightness can result in a very, very dark image. And then the only way you can either use a player like the Panasonic, you can use a custom curve, or in the case of this, at least the case of the JVC, you can adjust the picture tone control. Because obviously the new JVCs do have this auto tone mapping where they will read the data and try and adjust the image accordingly, but it doesn't always work because it doesn't always read the data. In the case of Overlord, for example, it didn't, and I found that using the picture tone control to just adjust the overall, basically move the curve, and as Ricky's saying, bring in some of those highlights back and make it a bit brighter is the only option. Okay,
so I want to get both of your opinions on the next point then, and it's a point which. When I come to setting it up for my personal use, so we're not talking about review use, where we have to do everything, by the book. What I tend to do is, as a compromise, is I would rather see more detail in the shadows, in the blacker areas, because our eyes are designed to pick out that detail. That's why we're good with shadow detail and so on. And it's an evolutionary thing where our eyes are trained to do that. And clip the top end, because at the end of the day, we see less changes in the brightness, or we're less susceptible to changes in brightness and noticing those than we are in the shadows and with darker areas. So I would rather, if something's tone mapping a certain way, that it did blow out the highlights, kept the brightness, but gave me more of the lower end and mid tones. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. When we set up projectors, whether it's JVC, Epson or Sony, we tend to go for 3 curves in there for HDR. We go for one that's set for around 1,200 nits, because you get some titles that are just over 1,000 nits, so we go for 1,200. We then do a 4,000 nit to stay faithful to that, and then we do a mid, which is around a 2,500 nit sort of clip. What we tend to find with customers, although we give them those sort of offers, they usually fall back on the 1,200 nit, because it is a brighter overall image. You can get more in the darkness, and while it's clipping at the top end, that top end clip, you're actually clipping only a smaller amount of information in a film. It's not going to be in every scene. Most of the information is going to be set well below that, and so they would rather get rid of the one kind of between 1,200 and 4,000 nits, get rid of that top end and make sure the bottom's being resolved as well as it can be.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like Ricky just said, for the majority of a film, you're rarely going to be hitting that peak nit measurement of 1,000 nits or even close to that. Most of the time it's going to be down much lower than that. So if you can retain the shadow detail, the good blacks and more of the image detail, and in the sort of the lower part of the curve, if you like, then all the better. And if you're losing a bit of detail in the top end occasionally, then it's really not that important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's one of these things that I've noticed, and through experience, and obviously you guys have your own experiences as well, that it just seems to sit better with the eyes. And again, we're talking specifically here with projectors and projected images. It just seems to fit better with the eyes. To lose the highlights, like you say, Ricky, there's very little to see there. Maybe the odd cloud or shadow line round a bright object or whatever. If you're doing a tone map which is robbing detail in the shadows, I think that robs more of the image and image depth than it does at the top end. And and it's interesting that a lot of manufacturers seem to be heading that way. It's interesting what you say as well, Steve, that more and more titles are 1000 nits. I think this is starting to become the industry standard at the moment, or certainly maybe not a standard, but maybe what's the word I'm thinking of? It's maybe something that they've agreed on.
Preferred. I think it's their preferred.
Yeah.
I think, certainly from talking to colorists and in the industry, like the guy that we met at the Panasonic thing a month ago. Yeah, he was talking about doing a digital intermediate and an HDR pass, and specifically he said he liked working at 1000 nits. So it's more than enough to do what he wants to do. Most displays can do that or get close to it. Certainly when I talk about not projectors but with TVs, and I don't think he's the only one. I've heard that from other people as well. So it seems like now that there's been a period of adjustment in the industry, from a creative perspective, most people seem to think that they can deliver what they want to deliver with 1000 nits. And a lot of the 4000 nit stuff that's out there really has come from via Dolby, who have obviously been using their Pulsar with a 4000. A lot of the stuff's graded on the Sony monitors, which are only 1000 nits anyway. So unless it's been done on a Pulsar, then it's going to be 1000 nits because that's the most it could do. There are some 4000 nit stuff out there. There was more in the early days when I think Dolby was pushing it because it was the early days of HDR and they wanted to get a foothold. But even now, I've seen Dolby Vision discs that are still only 1000 nits. So I think it's becoming the norm, 1000 nits, and certainly for things like Netflix, it's definitely 1000 nits. And there are a few 4000 nits out there, but I think it's less common than it was in the early days of HDR, and it seems as though the industry is settling down with thinking that's good enough, that's delivering what they want, and it's also the established display base out in the marketplace can deliver that reasonably well. So,
I mean, it's one of these things that it's perhaps there's less things to go wrong. If they all stick to 1000 rather than trying to push it too early, and then you get different results on different TVs because most TVs out there do tone map for the different data that they get in. So if it's a 4000 nit master, it will tone map differently than it will for 1000, and maybe it's just one of these things again through experience because everybody's learning at this point. It's maybe just one of those things that is starting to catch on. Another interesting thing that I've certainly noticed, I don't know about you guys, but when you're talking about max fall and max CLL, so that's maximum frame average light level and maximum content light level, two slightly different things, but these are the numbers that you normally see if your player or projector or whatever can read the data from the disc and read the metadata. It normally has the numbers there, and one of the interesting things is that certainly for the maximum content light level, I've never really seen that above 800 nits for the majority of Hollywood film material, and certainly some material I haven't seen any numbers over 600 nits, which is interesting.
No, in fact, I think 400 tends to be quite a common number. You're right. Yeah, I mean, which just goes back to Ricky's point that most of the time it's never going anywhere near 1000 nits.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that just backs it up, really.
Just going to say there are some unusual films that do use it and do go quite high. I mean, Mad Max, still now being one of the first 4K discs out, really does push everything.
That was
pushes out more.
Dolby Vision. Dolby did that HDR pass, and that's why I think it's it pushes it's a 4000 nit disc, isn't it? Interestingly, I don't know if it's actually coded that way, but the Blade Runner 2049 disc on the Oppo, at least, it says it's a 10,000 nit.
The American one is the European one's 4000, I believe.
But the American one, it says 10,000 nits, which is
Yeah, I think that's the only 10,000 one there is.
Yeah, so I mean, what is the display supposed to do then if that's what it's reading? You know what I mean? If it's reading that, then it has to be falling back on something. So yeah, I mean, Ricky, it's still a bit Wild West when it comes to HDR in the home and so on. So in terms of solutions that you're recommending to your clients, what seems to be the feedback that you get in terms of what it is that you're selling into the market and what the feedback is on the performance?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I mean, we're on projectors. It is a bit like the Wild West at the moment. We are using these custom curves on Sony and JVC projectors. The Epsons have their own slider where you don't have as much control on those, but you do have a slider, and definitely on the 9400 that has got better. The TW 9400. We are trying to give customers options because no projector can meet the standard, so we want to kind of give them options to see what they prefer, and we're having to learn as we're doing it, try and make the most of what the potential of the projector has. You go back to the discs, and obviously most of them, even though they're mastered at 1,000, just like most of the discs are at Rec 2020, they're actually not using that. A lot of the discs, like you say, are coming out of 400 nits. The big problem is a lot of the discs, even now, I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody, the UK editions one, doesn't have the metadata on it, which means that the projectors or the displays have to fall back on the standard EOTF. So they'll fall back onto 1,200 nits or 4,000 nits, but literally have to work to that rather than using the Max Full or the Max CL in their calculations. We also do obviously go a bit further sometimes, and we use Lumigens in there in the system, which they do their own. They can do their own sort of tone mapping, and will cover all the sources. They have also introduced in the last couple of weeks. They've introduced dynamic tone mapping on the Lumigen Pro, where they're actually analysing the scenes and making adjustment based on the actual picture information. Because the other caveat to the metadata on the disc is it's not always right. It's been shown that calculations that have been done by a computer have been wrong, or there can be a 1 pixel within a film that has an unusual luminance value will actually throw the calculation out or give you the wrong figure. So it is a minefield. It really is.
It is. But seemingly with all this, we still can get some pretty decent images on our displays and on our projectors that are enjoyable. So if somebody's looking at a projector, Ricky, and looking at marrying up a player to go with it and maybe an Apple TV and so on, what would you recommend in terms of products that are out there that maybe out of the box or with a little bit of work can give end users a really nice image, in your opinion?
Well, I think under £3,000, I think the Epson TW9400 is amazing value for what you get. Yeah, the slider on that gives you the potential, the HDR slider gives you the potential that if a film is too dark, you can open that up by moving the slider. And I just think below that £3,000 mark, I mean at £2,550 retail, it can give you some really good HDR images, that one. Also having a filter in there, P3, giving you almost P3 coverage, it gives you very good colours on it. After that, obviously you then get to the Sonys and the JVCs. My feeling is, I mean, I do think the JVCs pip it. I think they have done for the last few years. I think there's a lot of talk about the N5 compared to the VW270 at the moment, the Sony £5,000 against JVC £6,500 machine. My feeling is, though, that N5, having looked at it this week, I looked at a customer's one, it actually competes with the VW570. Sony, when you look at feature set, the quality, everything like that. So you have got a VW270 that sits in there at £5,000. For me personally, as a calibrator, it's a good projector and I can work with it, but I don't like the fact it hasn't got a manual iris to be able to work with. That really does bug me for SDR. For HDR, you're probably going to have the iris open anyway, although it's useful to have a dynamic iris. But for SDR, there are situations where it is too bright, and I much prefer having the ability to curb the brightness for the SDR side of things. But for SDR, I mean, the projectors, whether it's the Epson, the Sony, or the JVC, they all do very well. It's just the HDR side of things. JVC's attempt this year with HDR, with the tone mapping, is a very good attempt. Their main issue is the content just not...
It's not their fault, is it? But if Fox don't put the data on their disc, there's not much that JVC can do about it.
Exactly.
Or anyone, for that matter, anyone who's them, because not just JVC, but if you look at Samsung and LG TVs, they do dynamic tone mapping on the fly. And again, they're dependent on them being able to read the data from the disc and to start with. And Fox is the worst offender.
This is why you're seeing kind of some of the video processor side of things. So the Lumagen Radiance Pro and MadVR on the PC side of things, where they're actually starting to actually analyze the frames themselves to see how much light is in there and what the pixels are doing, and doing their own tone mapping. They're not relying wholly on the disk metadata. And I think that's where the technology is going to have to go, really.
And we're already starting to see that. I mean, we were in a technical briefing last week or the week before. I can't remember where I am in terms of time, but Samsung are doing something very similar, Steve, with their dynamic tone mapping.
The picture,
so they're analysing it, histogram and so on, and trying to see where the colour should be and light and so on, and then trying to do a dynamic tone map with it. So yeah, I agree with you, Ricky. I think if the technology is good enough to do it, I think that's going to be important. Why we still have HDR10 in the game. Once I think we move to dynamic metadata, and then you've got the cycle of equipment to catch up. So you're not talking about a couple of years there. You're talking about a full cycle really to get through products before we're there. But until we get to dynamic tone mapping and the displays actually doing what they should be doing, the use of algorithms and that kind of thing that these manufacturers are doing, that's where it could really work for the projectors.
Definitely. I think, projectors are in a funny situation. I mean, they would work best with dynamic metadata. They really would. That would be, but until Dolby released the information, or until one of them can get something signed up with HDR10 Plus, although obviously there's limited source information with HDR10 Plus, they do have to work with different tone mapping, different ideas to try and get the most from them.
And it is interesting that Dolby Vision are not going anywhere near projectors at the minute, Steve.
No, it's true. They haven't gone anywhere near projectors yet. As Ricky just pointed out, it would be great if you could apply dynamic tone mapping to dynamic metadata to projectors, because that's where it would really add value. I'm assuming that when you're talking about Dolby Vision in the cinema, that's using a completely separate grade that's designed for a projector, where they're delivering maybe 200-300 minutes max on those laser projectors that they use in Dolby Cinema. So, aside from maybe providing a completely different grade for projectors owners, the future really is going to have to be in dynamic metadata.
Yeah, and just to wrap up on projectors, we're going to have to come back to calibration in future episodes, but I'm sure Ricky's not got any problems in coming along in the future to talk about calibration when we get into that subject. But let's stick with projectors for the evening. Just to wrap up, light sources, more and more laser light sources. LED was a bit of a damp squib. It had a lot of promise, instant on, instant off, and nice colour spectrum there and energy, which made colours a bit purer and so on. But it was too dull, and to get it bright enough, Ricky, you needed a hell of a big cooling system, and that just meant really loud projectors, which doesn't work in a home theatre environment. So we are now starting to move over to laser. What's your thoughts on what you've seen? And I'm assuming that you have seen some of the big laser models out there.
Yeah, I mean, I had the VW760 in our demo room for a year, so that's Sony's £15,000 offering. Yeah. I've seen the 870. I've seen the Z1 a few times. I've dealt with that a few times, and it is definitely the way forward. One of our biggest sellers over the past few years, it's died off now and been discontinued, was actually the Epson lasers, the LS10000 and 10500. It gave really quite good images. And the light source helped a lot with creating sort of a usability for a lot of people, because people started forgetting about using a bulb and worrying about putting 2 hours on here or 2 hours on there, and they started using it more because they knew they had thousands of hours out of this laser, which made it became much more usable as a projector for TV series and things like that. People would turn it on for half hour or for an hour. But aside from that, it's also the color. It can reach a lot further. I mean, if you look at the Epson LS10000, 10500, their color reach into Rec 2020 was really quite big compared to all other projectors. It could easily do P3, and it would go over 80% into Rec 2020. So obviously without the actual luminance, but on the actual color side of things, it really could go quite far. And I think Hisense have shown a short throw projector that could actually nearly get to Rec 2020. It was over 90%. And I think it is the way forward. I mean, EU regulations on bulbs means they're slowly being phased out, normal UHP bulbs. So I think in 10 years' time, it is all going to be laser based, but that it does offer opportunities. If you look at one of the things that the Epson laser grabbed people with is if you had the dynamic contrast on, it could dim its laser and turn its laser off almost instantly, which meant I used Mad Max again. I mean, we did a lot of demos with that because it was out at the same sort of time. But literally in the cutscenes, as you go through the credits, literally the laser would shut off and then it would come back full brightness without any delay. And it was a really big in-your-face sort of wow factor that because the speed of the laser, it really did make a big difference. I mean, with time, it's going to go RGB laser once they work out how it will work properly for the eyes. At the moment, they're obviously using 2 lasers through a filter, but there definitely is the potential there. The consistency as a calibrator, the consistency is very good, so you can set it up at the beginning and it will last a lot longer than a UHP bulb will, which with time and with hours will move, it will dim, whereas a laser takes a lot longer to dim. So I'm sure we're going to see over the next 5 years or so that is going to move down further and further in price, and it will give the opportunity for them to push contrast and colour gamuts on the projector side of things.
Yeah, I know Steve spent Christmas with an 870, as did I. It just worked out that way, and I've got one coming back end of this month for full review, so I'm going to have that for another few weeks. Now, it's a £25,000 projector. It has a designated marketplace, which is custom installation. It's not something that your average AVForums member is going to go and buy at 25 grand. And to be honest, and I think Steve will back me up on this, the black level just isn't there, for the money you're spending and so on. What is really impressive is the light source, is the colour, and that lens. I've never seen an image from a projector as sharp as that. It's something else to see, and if that's a future, and like I say, in terms of colour accuracy, and doing that without putting a filter in the light path as well, because what you got to remember with a filter is it's going to dim the image down because you're physically putting something in front of the light path, which you don't have to do with Sony's projector there. I don't know what you want to add to this, Steve, but I've got to say laser definitely is the future, and that was some of the most cinematic images I've seen for a long time. And when I say that, I mean like out of black. The blacks weren't great; they weren't inky deep like the JVCs are at £10,000, but the mid-range, the mid-tones, the detail that was within there, and the sharpness, it's really promising, which is why I'm excited for the future of projectors, because I don't think they're dead yet.
No, not at all. No, there's still life in the old dog, yeah, and laser's definitely the way forward. I mean, for all the reasons you said, the instant on and off, the consistency, the fact it doesn't dim, the very wide color gamuts, the instant on and off in terms of just turning the laser off to give you deep blacks and that real punchy, contrasty wow factor, and a consistency within the image that you're talking about, Phil, in terms of detail in the mid range. It's got massive potential. It's just a question of being able to deliver it at something approaching an affordable price, which Epson got. To be fair to Epson, they came. I mean, the 10500 was that 5-6 grand.
It came out at £6,000. By the time it was discontinued, it was about 4.5. They were doing it at.
Wow,
that was a really good buy. I mean, it was a great projector. I really like that projector. As Ricky said, it could deliver the whole of P3, no problem at all. So if we can see native 4K projectors that start to approach that price point with laser projection, with a laser light source, that's definitely the way forward.
Yep, absolutely. Right, so we need to wrap this one up for this week. But like I say, the invitation's there for Ricky to come along in the near future, and we're going to cover calibration over probably a number of weeks, probably a number of months, because there's so much going on at the moment in terms of display technology, in terms of calibrators being able to talk to displays nowadays in ways that have never been done before in the past. So there's lots to cover there, and specifically AutoCal and so on. There's the public's perception of calibration. Is it still worth spending, which isn't an insignificant amount, on calibration and so on? So we're going to cover all those points going forward. And Ricky, you also sell calibration equipment, so you've got a nice insight into the different tools that can be used to calibrate displays, everything from the enthusiast level up to really serious professional level. So that's something we're going to come back to, so stay tuned to the podcast. That's coming in the next few weeks and months ahead. Right, before we wrap up and go to Ed, who's going to talk audio for a change, and I'm sure in the time that we've been talking he's been knocking the beers back. So Samsung are going to stop making UHD players. There was a bit of an outcry. This is the end of 4K Blu-ray disc. If one of the manufacturers is pulling out, then everything's going to hell in a handcart. That's not the case. And I think it's important that we just briefly touch on this, because there are reasons that Samsung are withdrawn from the market. Most of it's financial, and most of it is the fact that they can't compete with everybody else because they will not do Dolby Vision. And everything's moving over to Dolby Vision. They won't do Dolby Vision. They'll only have HDR10 Plus on their players, which means that they can't ask a premium, which means that is there any point in them continuing to make their players? And the other point of view is that I don't know anybody with a Samsung player.
I was going to say, the headline, obviously, the articles that were written were to get attention. The reality is that Samsung pulled out of the player market over a year ago, but no one even noticed. That's the reality. They didn't release a player last year. It's still the M9 500, which was from 2 years ago, that you could buy. So they didn't even release a player last year. So they've already pulled out. They pulled out last year. They just didn't tell anyone, and no one even noticed, because, as you said, Phil, no one was really buying their players anyway. And they've realised now that they can't compete with Panasonic, who are doing players that do both HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision, and they're not going to put Dolby Vision on their players for obvious reasons at the moment, at least. So why make one? The point is there's plenty of other players available for people to buy. So don't panic. It's not like this. I mean, I know Oppo pulled out as well, but that was for completely different reasons. That has nothing to do with they were selling every player they made. That's not why they pulled.
They could have sold them 3 or 4 times over.
Yeah, they could have. They were selling every player they made, but it's just they could make more money making phones. Samsung's pulled out because no one buys their players and no one's that interested, and they didn't want to do a player that did Dolby Vision. LG, let's look at LG. They haven't done a new player in 2 years either. They've basically pulled out as well. They just haven't said it officially, but I'm not expecting to see a player for LG this year either.
So who does this leave? Just I've been trying
currently,
to work this out.
You've got Sony, Panasonic, and Pioneer.
Yeah,
I'm not forgetting one. Am I? I'm not forgetting one.
No, and Panasonic has the whole market covered, so everything from about £100 or upwards. For a 4K player. The £100 player, or the one that's going to be £100, only does HDR10 Plus, but everything from about £150 upwards.
If you're looking to buy
does
a player,
both.
just get a Panasonic.
Yeah,
can't
absolutely.
go wrong.
Or a Sony, just to be fair and balanced.
Well, yeah, the Sony bits. I think the Panasonics are better. To be honest, that's the bottom line. I've reviewed them both, and for my money, I would definitely go with the Panasonic. It's just I think they're just a better all-round player, and the Sony's not ideal. But if you're a Sony fan, there is the X700, which does Dolby Vision, and it's a nice little player.
Yeah, and I don't know anybody that's going to go and buy a Pioneer at over
I don't see the
£2,000.
point of buying those price points, and also they, I wouldn't get a Pioneer. Definitely, if you're going to go high end, go for the 9000.
Yeah. Okay, anything to add to that, Ricky?
No, the only kind of question mark I've got is obviously Samsung have pulled out at the moment, but obviously Samsung own a load of different groups of companies, and whether they will bring out a more high-end player via, say, Arcam, which obviously Samsung owns Harman, who own kind of Lexicon, who then Harman also own Arcam. So whether they would re-enter the market at a different level where they can make money, it would be interesting to see.
That's an interesting
my
one.
words carefully. Arcam is not falling over themselves to get back into the video display category.
And I think we can leave it at that.
And also, let's not forget, Lexicon tended to buy someone else's player and stick it in a different box.
In a really big metal box.
Yeah. I happened to be sitting in somebody's office that day in the States, and a review was published on that very day, and I'm not going to name names, but the company who had put their stamp of approval on this player was suddenly in a panic that day. It was a completely free box.
No, it wasn't even that. It was just the player physically inside.
That's what I mean. It was just a rebox. It was like a box round a box. It was okay. It was pretty hilarious. Anyway, so that's us wrapped up on the video side, and we've left a tiny slither of time for Ed to talk about audio. So, what are you going to talk about, Ed?
Well, according to this running order, I'm talking about the Naim Uniti Nova, and I will be quick because this is the third of the Unities, and we've looked at all three of them because, bluntly,
you love Naim.
Well, I do like Naim, but we've been talking about personal preferences over projectors, so you guys can. I wouldn't fling too many stones from that glass house, Mr. Withers. No, the reason is more bluntly, these are the best all-in-ones, and it's been an interesting question because the Unity Star was better than the entry-level Unity Atom, and it already did everything. And as the Star costs more money and does less, what does it do? And that was something that I set out to answer by the medium of actually taking it out of the box and giving it a prod. And the answer is, if you are buying speakers up to and including about $3,000, you don't really need the Unity Nova. The Unity Star is an absolutely outstanding product. Doesn't need any excuses for its existence. The Unity Nova is basically Naim's attempt to build the all-in-one system to end all-in-one systems. When I started testing it, some of the people who listen to this regularly, poor souls, will recall that I had a pair of Wilsons here, £13,000 worth of loudspeaker, bolted them onto the end of the Unity Atom, sounded absolutely outstanding. It's designed to essentially allow you to run pretty much any loudspeaker under $10,000, and it will run quite a selection above that point. It's essentially a fit and forget all-in-one system to end just to cover all of your bases and allow you to get everything done from a single relatively slimline chassis. And with that in mind, I've stated that it's the best in class because it is probably, and there's always an element of uncertainty because I'm sure somebody somewhere might go somewhere to try and better it, but if you just want to buy one box that gets everything right, you can be pretty much free in your speaker choices unless you want to bolt something truly ridiculous to it. It's just there as a means of providing really state-of-the-art hi-fi experience from a single box. But unless you really are going to spend out on speakers to go with it, don't discount the Unity Star. And if you're just looking for a truly ridiculously good product at a slightly more sensible price, the Unity Atom.
Just to clarify, so there's the Atom, which is little streamer,
with about 1,800 quid, amp and streamer.
Quid. Yeah, and then there's the Nova. Is that right?
The Star. Now, the Star does more than any of the others because it's able to rip and play CDs.
Yeah, that's why I had my eye on that. That looks quite interesting.
It's incredibly good. The Nova uses the space that the Star has for a CD drive for a proper high-spec Naim power supply. So although it only has more 10 more watts. As I explain in the copy, its ability to deliver current to more difficult loads is quite significantly better than the Star. So if you are, I mean, Naim have done demonstrations at dealers and at shows where they've used the Nova with $7,000 and above focals, and it just gets on with the job. So it's an incredibly convenient way of doing high-end audio. But if you aren't, perfectly justifiably in a position to drop $20,000 on the problem, the Star does do a hell of a lot. And all of that CD ripping ability and ability to operate as a server for other Naim products on a network, this is the benchmark that's been set for what you can expect from a really good all-in-one. It does everything that you could want sonically. You can park an HDMI ARC signal into the back of them for connecting a television, and they just do all the things that you want incredibly stably. They're beautifully made, and they give you pretty much free choice on matching speakers to them. As I've stated on a couple of podcasts and in the copy, I lived with a Star for several months whilst I've been in my shed, and the Nova's still here at the moment. And honestly, the separates that I habitually use are better, but there's more plugs, more hassle, more connection faff. They're just ridiculously good. And it's just little things like being able to, they've got Google Cast, which is to be expected, but they've implemented the Cast so it's fully 24.192 capable. So you might go, oh, well, they don't do Cobuzz, but you can make a Google Cast connection to them for Cobuzz and do any of the high-res stuff that Cobuzz offers without any form of compression on them at all. They have pretty much thought of everything, except, and I say this as a single man, the volume control at the top is an absolute bastard of a dust magnet. It doesn't matter unless you clean it every day. It builds up dust in the residue around the well, and it's really annoying. Okay, there you go. Because I've been trying to keep this place clean. Because I don't know whether I'm just getting menopausal or something, and it's you're nesting. It's very things like that have begun to annoy me, because in my Quadraspire rack, which pictures exist thereof, which has got shelving, things can be stuffed in and they don't build up dust as much, and if they do, you can't see it. But in the current situation, you can see dust build up, and it's most frustrating. And products with louvers, indents, and other stupidity, you need to think about this, because they look great for a day and then just begin to look progressively sadder.
There's something about product at the minute where the materials being used, as soon as you get them out of the box, just seem to attract fingerprints, grease, dust, and it's one thing I've been getting really frustrated with the last few weeks, filming kit and that kind of thing. And we're talking about AVRs, and I had a projector, an Optoma projector, and obviously these are review samples, so that Optoma's been around every review office in the UK and arrived with me in a battered box and all the rest of it. And no matter how hard I tried to clean that thing once I'd unboxed it, for the video, there was just no getting away from the fact that there was dust on it and marks and greasy fingerprints and all the rest of it. And there's absolutely no cleaning solution I have found. And if anybody out there knows of anything, tell me, because I've tried absolutely everything that you can get from the supermarkets. I've been online, I've been to specialists and looked and tried different things, and nothing gets the worst one. The worst product, and it's not something I'm filming, it's actually a camera that I bought recently, is a GoPro Hero 7, and it's actually black now, but as soon as you take it out of the box and start touching it, it looks like it's 5-year-old.
It has to be said, since I've started using that pop-up studio for photography, I have gone through the agonies of damn. I will say that Huggies wipes are unexpectedly effective at dealing with a lot of these things, and obviously that's something that's been lying around in my life for some years now. But no, there are certain things where I just give up. If nothing else, it's an accurate representation of what you, the potential owner, will see when it's out of the box.
That's now my approach. Look, this is what's going to happen to your product.
It's gritty realism. It looks like this, mate.
And there's nothing worse than black AVRs for fingerprints as well.
People, if you go and look back at my Roxanne Radius 7 review, which is made of clear acrylic, I handled that into photography via gloves after cleaning it for 25 minutes, and it's still got pissing fingerprints on it, and it ultimately, it's just a forensics trap. I mean, if I ever do anything terrible, you'll probably be able to identify me by just
get out that black light and see how bad it is.
Okay, I think we need to move this conversation on. So that's hardware for this week. And like I say, there's some subjects in there that we're definitely going to come back to and revisit throughout the next few weeks and months. So lots to look forward to there. We'll be back in a sec with movie news. Right, so movie news and reviews. So this is a film that's already been reviewed, but we're going to take it from a different point of view because Kaz's already covered this. He covered it last week. It's Captain Marvel. But myself and Steve caught it this week. I am assuming that you did see it in 3D IMAX, Steve.
I did, yes.
Yeah. So the same as myself. So just for context, I saw it at the Metro Centre, just outside Gateshead. It's an Odeon cinema. It is a proper IMAX screen. It's only about 8 or 9 year olds, so presentation wise and so on, it's absolutely stonking in terms of audio and light levels and all the rest of it. I've got no complaints about the screen in particular. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, it's the Odeon IMAX in Cardiff, which is only a few years old. The picture is absolutely pristine, perfect presentation, beautiful image, fantastic sound. I love going there. I mean, I'm literally driving. It's not a massive distance, but it's a fair way to Cardiff from where I live. But I'm prepared to go that way for the kind of presentation I'm getting, compared to say the Odeon in Bath, which is pants. Right. So worth it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say it's the second movie I've seen recently after Alita in 3D IMAX, and I have to say I absolutely love the IMAX presentation.
They're getting really, really good at 3D conversions.
They are. I was just going to say that 3D conversion wise, it was incredibly good. There was a few instances, and it was right at the beginning, first few scenes, where there's a lot of kinetic energy, camera moving quite a bit, and a lot of action going on and so on, where I did feel it lost something in the translation there, and I think it was just the type of editing that was going on at the time, the action scene and so on, but the rest of it was absolutely spot on. Sound design, amazing. I'm picking this disc up no matter what, because the sound design was stonkingly good. And when you think about what you've got to play with here, and of course we're not going to spoil the film for anybody, but some of the toys that they play with, some of the things that happen, some of the powers that are suddenly unveiled that characters have, and it's just one of those experiences where the presentation and everything along with it, the same as Alita, although I thought Alita wasn't as good a movie. That's not saying that Captain Marvel's great, but a bad Marvel film's still better than a lot of things out there. I thought Alita lost it in the second half. Great first half, great build-up, then it sort of lost it. Whereas I liked the tone of Captain Marvel. I liked the nostalgia angle, and they didn't play it too much either. They weren't over the top with it. I didn't think so anyway. And again, a bad Marvel's still a good film. And
I don't think it's had some iffy reviews. I think they've been a bit harsh. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
I'd give it an 8. I'd give it an 8.
It's a fun film. I think Sam Jackson's having the most fun I've seen him have on screen since The Hitman's Bodyguard, and the de-aging. I tell you, after 5 minutes, I totally forgot.
Yeah, it was really good.
That wasn't what Sam Jackson looks like. They did that brilliantly. They didn't do so well with Greg Clark, I have to say. He plays Agent Coulson. I thought he looked a bit plasticky, but he's only in a couple of scenes. But Sam Jackson, who is in a large chunk of the film, it was de-aged really well. They've done a bang up job on that. They're really starting to nail that technology.
Yeah.
But I thought she was really good. I've got a problem with the narrative structure in the sense that the sort of like she starts off the film with amnesia. She doesn't know her past. She can't remember her past. But they then show the audience her past before she realizes it. So from that point on, you know what her past is because you find out quite early on in the film, and she then discovers later on in the film, which means there's no dramatic tension because you know what she's going to find out. If they drip fed the information to you as she discovered it, it would have made it slightly more interesting. Or they just changed the narrative structure so that you started off with her on Earth, and then led up to what happens later, and then got to know her as a character. Because I would have liked to have got to know her more as a character, because they're really good stuff. The stuff that worked really well for me was the stuff when she meets up with her friend later in the film. And you get the blanks starting to be filled in, and there's some quite nice little scenes there. And you thought, well, they could have done more of that either at the beginning of the film, or they could have introduced bits in a more introduced her memories in a more creative way. It was just a bit clumsy, but as entertainment, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it was funny. I thought the cat steals the film for me. Absolutely steals the film. I thought it was great. Obviously, it is, one of those movies where probably the other fault, it's not a fault, but it's got two problems. One, I think, is it's got a slightly iffy narrative structure, but it suffers from being, it's filling in the few missing pieces before Endgame, basically, isn't it? There's a couple, it's like, we know that at the end of Infinity War, Fury calls Captain Marvel, but now you've got to find out who the hell she is and where is she. What does that mean? So they're filling a bit like Ant-Man and the Wasp, which obviously fills in a few gaps, in terms of the quantum realm, which I'm pretty sure is going to be a big thing in Endgame. Obviously, they needed to fill in who the hell Captain Marvel is before she turns up in Endgame.
Yeah,
which interestingly, she was in the new trailer. As soon as the new trailer hit, just after there she is. I've got to say, actually, before the film, they showed the previous trailer for Endgame, which I've seen a few times online. And watching it in IMAX 3D,
in 3D? It was
completely
stunning.
Different experience. And I just thought, my God, that looks good.
Yeah, it was, the way the spaceships hang in space and the depth and
using that was
phenomenal.
Stunning. So I was already jazzed for it anyway, but I cannot wait to see that in IMAX 3D.
Yeah.
So
if you haven't jazzed,
Captain Marvel, it's already made 800 million worldwide. It's been a massive hit, and it's worth seeing.
I don't think this is spoilerish. The bad guy in it, Steve, he's the bad guy in Ready Player One as well, isn't he? He's
a bad guy in every film in the last 2 years.
What's his name again?
Ben Mendelsohn.
Ben Mendelsohn. The only thing I've got here, this maybe is spoilerish actually, the more I think about it. Fast forward 10 seconds. Obviously, the shapeshifters, he looks the same as he does. Shapeshifted.
And he's using his normal Aussie accent.
I know.
But yeah, he's like the go-to villain at the moment. He was a villain in Rogue One. He was a villain in Ready Player One. He was the villain in Robin Hood. He's just the go-to villain. It's interesting that there's a twist about 2/3 of the way through the film, which isn't actually massively a twist if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy, because two of the characters in that are in this film.
Yeah, there is that, and obviously
two of the villains in that film, shall I say, are in this film, which kind of gives away the twist a little bit. But anyway. I did enjoy it. I thought it was great fun. Presentation-wise,
if you can go and see it IMAX 3D, do it, because the presentation is worth it, and it's worth. I mean, obviously, I've got a Limitless card, but I'm happy to spend the $5 on top of the Limitless card to go and see it in IMAX. I think big films like that really deserve it. And like you say, Endgame, that is going to look. If the trailer's anything to go by in 3D, that is going to look.
Trailers interesting too, because they're really playing their cards close to their chest. I mean, the trailer's only really showing you probably the first 5-10 minutes of Endgame. It's like, you still have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. Yeah. But apparently it could be up to 3 hours long. It's going to be absolutely epic. Yeah.
So mid credits is worthwhile sticking around for. End credits, don't bother with.
The end credits is funny though. I think it's quite funny.
Come on, this is just.
So yeah, and also interesting that the mid-credit sequence you absolutely do have to watch.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Watch that and then leave. You don't stay at the end, because I stayed to the end, and I was like, all right, okay, that added nothing.
Unless you're a cat fanatic, in which case.
Right. Okay. So let's move on. We've got lots to talk about in the movies section. So yeah, go see it if you can see it in 3D IMAX. Right. Films coming out this week, Steve.
I'm gonna.
I'm assuming that was sneeze.
Yeah, I just muted it so you didn't blow your eardrums out. Right, coming out this week we've got Us, which is a new film from Jordan Peele, who made the excellent Get Out. It's about a family's life is basically turned to chaos when a group of doppelgangers begin to terrorize them. I've seen the trailer; looks interesting. I really, really enjoyed Get Out. It's written and directed by Jordan Peele. I think he's a talented guy, and that definitely has piqued my interest. If I get a chance to go to the cinema, I'll go and see it. Hopefully this week, if I have time. Although I've got quite a lot on this week, so I may not have time. But I do fancy seeing it. Also out, 5 Feet Apart, which is a sort of teen illness drama. Someone's dying and they fall in love.
Teen illness drama.
Well, no, that's a
no,
whole
you're
load
right.
of
It
those.
is
There's
an
a whole load of
it is a
teen illness
category,
dramas.
and that just depresses me on a level I can't actually easily put into words.
I never get over going to see The Fault in Their Stars. Me and 500 weeping teenage girls.
Isn't that because you exposed yourself halfway through?
It wasn't because of me that
They'd have been laughing, not weeping.
Yeah. Anyway, 5 Feet Apart. Yes, it's a teen romance drama about.
The only thing I note with that is that it's got Claire Filani in it, who I haven't seen do anything in a very long time. Has she been doing some US drama or something that I haven't paid attention to?
I don't know.
Because she's been quiet. I mean, perhaps she's been living a normal life, or
she married,
maybe just run out of money or something. But good for her. Sorry, that's
I can see
just
a
random aside.
Also out, The White Crow, which is a story of Rudolph Nureyev defection to the West, directed by Ray Fiennes, written by David Hare, so that's quite talented group there, and also stars Ray Fiennes too. Presumably he's not playing Nureyev. I think Oleg Ivanko might be.
I guess.
No shit, Sherlock.
I'm guessing. But yes, if you're interested in defecting ballet dancers, then The White Crow won't be.
It's not a genre yet, but who knows?
Unlike Teenage
Death.
Yeah, good stuff. So that's what's coming out of the cinema this week. Discs. There's quite a few actually, and quite a few really interesting things to pick up if you haven't already got the.
In fairness, 4 of them are kind of reissues. Escape from New York, The Fog, They Live, and Prince of Darkness are all out on 4K disc in sort of more bare bones packages because. Yeah. Previously, they've been released as sort of really involved packages with a CD, a soundtrack CD included, booklet, and some posters and this sort of stuff. This is just the movie and the extras.
I bet the graphics, the graphics intro was Snake flies into Manhattan. It looks absolutely banging in 4K. I can imagine. There's nearly 150.
Actually, it looks great because the graphics of him flying into Manhattan are not computer graphics.
No, isn't it rotoscoped?
No, it's not even that. James Cameron did the effects of Escape from New York, and what he did very cleverly was he built a model of New York in black cardboard and then just painted on the white grids, and they filmed that. So it's actually practical, and that's why it stands up.
All right, I stand corrected, said the man.
But the budgetary restrictions did come into play when the plane crashes, and it cuts from the shot of the plane to a little digital, animated thing of hitting a building and blowing up because they couldn't afford to shoot.
And I still love the fact that Donald Pleasance is the president. I mean, it's like
Donald Pleasance used to be the least convincing US president until Donald Trump became the US president, and now he's only the second least convincing US president in history.
I would rather have Donald Pleasance. Actually, even in his current condition, would probably be an improvement.
But anyway, yeah. So you got Escape from New York, The Fog, They Live, Prince of Darkness, all great films, and I've got them all already on the more elaborate releases. They look superb. I've done some really nice restoration work on these. But I think Studio Canal, I recommend them highly if you're a fan of John Carpenter. Also out this week on 4K disc and Blu-ray is Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. Not a great film, I have to say. A bit boring and a bit dull and grim and too many characters. Didn't enjoy it. I much preferred the previous Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. I thought they had a bit of charm. This seemed a bit charmless. But it does look good. It's a native 4K DI and Dolby Atmos soundtrack. And
you can tell it's not a very good film because the J.K. Rowling has lurched into action to generate some publicity around it.
She wrote it, so she's going to have to hold.
Well, she's been saying that it's apparently clear that Dumbledore and Grindelwald were in a hang on a second, a very specific level of gay relationship. It's not just normal. So hang on a second. I'm just trying to fire up Twitter. Actually, it's telling that if you type in Dumbledore into Twitter search result, the first auto-completed response that comes back, and I stress I haven't typed in Dumbledore into Twitter at any point in my life prior to this point, is Dumbledore bottom. So it's interesting what's been going on there, and obviously Twitter's been having a field day with that. So
she's basically saying that Jude Law and Johnny Depp were at it hammers and tongs, then, really.
Yes.
No.
And Twitter's just seized with that and talking about
It's not news, though. I mean, everyone knew they'd had an affair. Those characters.
Yeah, well, I think she's been, in all senses of the word, fleshing that out.
That's not the problem with the Crimes of Grindelwald. Crimes of Grindelwald's problem is it's just incoherent and boring. And it's got too many characters. It loses its focus. Harry Potter. The focus was on clearly Harry Potter. Here you've got the title makes no sense in the second film. Fantastic Beasts. Well, there aren't any Fantastic Beasts, or very few. It's not really about the book or Newt anymore. It's just let's be honest. It's just that there's too much cash out there, and Warner's had to go back to that well one more time, and they're going to do 3 more films. Although it didn't do very well, actually. It did a lot less business than the previous one. So who knows? Anyway, that's that. Also out on 4K and BD this week is Widows, which is Stephen McQueen's film version of the British miniseries Widows, or TV series Widows. A group of widows, basically, who carry out a robbery that was planned by their husbands before they were incarcerated or killed, presumably, given the title. Also out on Blu-ray from Arrow is Ring, the Japanese horror film with Sadako coming out of the TV, which is bloody scary, actually. And actually, you also got the Ring Collection, which is a limited edition collection of all the Ring movies. So you get the full Ring trilogy, which is Ring, Ring 2, and Ring Zero, which is the origin story of Sadako. Sadako or Sadako? No, Sudoku. Sudoku is that quiz, isn't it? Also, I think it also includes Spiral, which is a sequel that was made that's not Ring 2. It's a bit complicated. The whole Ring series of films gets quite complicated. I've got a friend who's really into them, and there's a Korean version as well, and there's obviously the 2 US versions of Ring. Anyway, if you're a fan of Ring films, that's the one for you.
Was it not called Ringo? Or is that something?
Ringu is the Japanese.
Ringu. Yeah.
Ringu is the Japanese title. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's basically in Japan. If you don't know the word in Japanese, stick a U at the end, and you're probably in the ballpark. Peru, Creditocado, Recito. You're going to be in the ballpark. If it's an English word, particularly where there's no Japanese original word, just stick a U or an O at the end, and you're going to be in the ballpark.
Okay,
Good
there
job.
we go. So that's the discs released this week. Before we go onto our final subject for the week, which we're all going to get involved with, even from a audio side of things, because I did put film in the running order, but it applies for music as well. So we're coming on to this. But before we do, I just thought I'd mention it. I watched that James May thing on BBC this week. I don't know if you've seen it about Hornby.
The Hornby thing.
Yeah.
What a thing. That's a programme made on a budget of 11p, but it was incredibly compelling. At the end, where he was talking to those, and he'd made the trains that they were making, and it was literally, if you come at the king, you best not miss, but with tiny, tiny trains. And in terms of weirdly compelling television, yes, Phil's exactly right.
It was
the James May thing. It's called, is it Big Trouble in Model Britain?
Yeah.
It's on iPlayer. Watch it. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
it's utterly brilliant.
And believe me, I have no interest in Scaletric or model railways or Airfix or anything like that. But it had me hooked straight away.
I'm really weird. Every now and again, I feel the strangest urge to build an Airfix model, and I don't think it's just the glue. I just occasionally feel, I
used to love making Airfix models when I was a kid.
Why am I not
it's just one of those
surprised?
things. I don't know.
Yeah. So highly recommended. Go watch it. I'm sure it'll feature again at the end of the month when we wrap up our favourite TV, because it really has been entertaining.
It was brilliant. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I watched the Apollo astronauts thing on Grand Tour as well.
All right.
It was
and
good,
what did you
wasn't
think?
it?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah. It was okay. I mean, I knew a lot of it already, but it was just kind of interesting to see. I was just wondering, did the guy buy it knowing it was Armstrong's car, or
it's
did it just happen? Yeah, it's a bit ambiguous, because that was a bit interesting. It was, how did he get hold of it? Did Armstrong sell it to him? Because he obviously knew it was Armstrong's car. But because you got to remember, in the mid to late 70s, when everyone had forgotten about the moon landing and it had become passé, and he was teaching in a university somewhere in the Midwest. I don't suppose anyone was that bothered.
No, my take on it, I might have picked it up wrong, but my take was it went to a dealer who then got in touch with the collector, and he took a punt on it because I think they thought it was going to be. as valuable as it is. That's the way I picked it up from what they said. But it was a bit of a
tour this week.
Yes, I have.
I have to be honest. I mean, it was, as all of these episodes, it's been hit and miss. But the 80s supercar sequence at the beginning was good telly.
It was. What did you think of the hot hatch thing? Seeing as you own the previous version.
I didn't learn anything about the hot hatches, although I will confirm, it is very, very easy to cook a Fiesta ST's brakes if you are feeling particularly ballistic, and I can't believe that's changed for a second. But no, I didn't find out anything about whether the Polo is actually a better car. But I don't watch these programs for information like that. I have to be honest. That's the first time I can recall actually seeing a Testarossa and an 80s period Countach being driven in any way hard, because they are actually so terrible to drive for the most part that most people don't bother. And just watching the Ferrari in particular, like pitching and wallowing around and going fractionally faster around the track than an up GTI was quite something.
I am surprised the owners allowed them to do that, considering the worth of them. Oh, sorry, it was one owner.
Both of them.
Yeah, they were driven enthusiastically, I've got to say, for classics. They didn't hang around.
But unreliable 80s Italian classics, especially. But it's it passes the time. I'm hoping that American Gods is going to be. I've seen the review online. Obviously, it's an acquired taste and it's determinedly weird. I'm going to leave it, because obviously Amazon leave all of their original content stuff up. I'm going to wait until I've got slightly less strangulated bandwidth and watch it proper 4K HDR. When I can do that.
I feel sorry for Kaz at the minute. The amount of Netflix that boy's getting through, it's unbelievable.
I think he's mastered the way of somehow beaming it into his brain, Inception style, whilst he's technically unconscious. That's the only answer that I can humour as to why.
All I say is, if there's anybody from Netflix listening in, which there won't be, but if there is, give him a week off. Just a week without releasing anything.
Just go long on episodes of Next Generation.
He's only got himself to blame, because he does watch a lot of crap on Netflix, so I'm not going to bother watching.
Well, you used to say, somebody has to watch this shit, so, you know.
The Formula 1 documentary is really good.
It is, isn't it?
It's really compelling. Yeah. That's some of the best stuff they've done.
And that Haas team.
And I'm not even a big fan of Formula 1, but it's absolutely compelling. Yeah, and beautifully shot too.
Fantastic. I'll say I want to go to Baku.
Right, so we're going to finish very quickly with what we're using as demo disc. Because we've got Ricky here. Ricky does lots of demos, I'm sure of that. I read some of the comments from people that do go along to his demos. So you are renowned for running a good set of demos, certainly from what the forum members say on AVForums, Ricky. So what's new for you at the minute, and what discs do you find yourself going to demonstrate?
I try to be kind of flexible, so I try and demo what people want to see, because people have a lot of different tastes. I also like to have people look at things they've recently watched, so it's easy for them to compare. But there are certain demos that I do use regularly. I mean, I do Jumanji 4K UHD. It's got a lot of outside scenes, so you get a lot of good contrast and good colours. But then you've got some of the darker stuff as well. So Gravity, so you get the star scenes, you can see the black levels. I mean, things that have come out recently. A Star is Born is quite good for the soundtrack. Obviously, it's only a 2K master. It's only a 1080p master. It's been upscaled, but for 4K, but it's still very good sounding. So yeah, I mean, there's things like Dunkirk. That's always a good one. The intro scene into that, very crisp. The IMAX scene, and it gets people's attention very quickly at the beginning with that first gunshot.
Yeah.
The amount of people, when you turn the system up, the amount of people that jump with that first gunshot, even people that have seen it, they forget about it, and it really takes them by surprise.
It's an astonishing 5:1 mix. Yeah. When you realise it's a 5:1 mix, because you just assume that it's immersive, and it's one of the best sound mixes for a number of years. So it's interesting that you've mentioned a lot of things that I know both myself and Steve use on a regular basis. Interesting you mentioned music, because that's one area where I've started to introduce a bit more into my roundup of discs that I tend to use on a regular basis, and that have been the same for the last few years. But I have introduced Christ,
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Bohemian Rhapsody, yes, Steve. That's quite a good disc, and obviously know the music really well, and it's a really nice dynamic with the music tracks in there. And it's something about sound mixes as well in films. They tend to add certain dynamics that aren't there on the original tracks because they're using them in a film scape like that. And I'm having a right brain fart at the minute.
Audio-wise, I would recommend a Quiet Place. If you want to test dynamic range on a system, that'll do it. Overlord, again, this one's not subtle, but if you want to really hammer your system, Overlord's first 10 minutes or so will do the job nicely. Picture-wise, I still think you can't beat Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, that's my go-to disc.
Native
Absolutely.
4K DI, tons of detail, but also a really bold use of colours and striking use of shadows and framing, and it's just a beautifully made film, and it looks stunning on disc. So that's always worth pulling out if you want something to look good. I like using. If I'm looking for something a bit like Ricky was talking about, Gravity, Life. It's not a brilliant film, although I quite enjoy it. But it's got a cracking soundtrack, and it's also got some really good use of dynamic range in terms of the image, with the black of space, the bright white sunlight hitting the bright white spacesuits, the outside of the spaceships, that kind of stuff. Again, it's a 4K DI, so lots of detail in that image too. So that's always a good one to use.
I am desperate to find something to replace Pan. I don't want to watch that anymore, even though they're little scenes. It's like I need to find another go-to. That because it's a crap film, but that disc has so many go-to scenes that you can instantly check. A bit like Blade Runner, I've got my scenes that I go to straight away to look for, artifacts, posterization, all that kind of thing that could be there. I just need to replace that. The other one that I ignored it for such a long time. I think you did as well, Steve. And it wasn't until the JVC demo. At IFA, The Greatest Showman. It was, and I'd ignored it for such a long time. What a dynamic soundtrack that is! It's fantastic.
Great. I really love that
really
song.
Good. Yeah,
it's really good.
It is. I
know it's historical bollocks,
yeah.
But the film itself is massively entertaining, and it's got some really good songs in it.
Yeah. So if anybody has a suggestion to replace Pan, please save us. It's one of those discs. It's just because it's a 4K. It's a 4000 nit.
If you want something that's just going to push it in terms of colours, I watched Ralph Breaks the Internet. I'm not sure why it's not called Ralph Wrecks the Internet. That seems like a more appropriate title for a sequel to Wreck-It Ralph. But anyway, Ralph Breaks the Internet. The use of colours in that, they really, really push it. Particularly in the game Sugar Rush at the beginning and that sort of stuff, there's some serious amount of colour in that.
Yep.
So if you want something that's going to push your display colour-wise, stick on a bit of Ralph Breaks the Internet.
Okay, and finally, music-wise, so we do have music in our tests when we're reviewing kit. I've been reviewing AVRs recently, so I've been actually getting back into music in quite some way recently, because it's been a while since I've reviewed AVRs and so on. So I'm really enjoying that. But Ed, you're always good for recommendations. So give us 3 choices: one that's that has everything, and then maybe 2 that concentrate in certain areas.
Right. Something for certain areas, bass management, the ability to just do deep, clean, perfect bass. You want Forgiveness by Emily King, because it's not a standard drum strike. It's a deep, resonant electronic note, and you can have speakers with lots of bass that just don't do it properly because it's just not controlled. It doesn't start, it doesn't stop properly. So go for that. You put me on the spot here. Then in terms of, it came out on Friday, but it does seem to genuinely have everything. It's been a long time coming. The new album by the Cinematic Orchestra called Believe. I've been listening to it over the weekend. It's an absolutely stellar piece of recording. It's just it's by people who care what they're doing and have the resources to make it sound exactly as they want it to. If you want a piece of tonal accuracy, tonal realism, you need to go there. And then a final slightly left field test track, you want No Tourist by The Prodigy, because it's a crap piece of recording. It's an enormously angry, wound up dynamic range exercise, but you're not unless you are fitting out a studio, you want a system that's able to handle that and make sure that it's still a listenable and enjoyable experience. So for all the bringing along peerless and pristine recordings, make sure that you also bring along examples of stuff that you love but isn't very good, because the last thing you want is for your favourite recordings to be off limits.
Yep. Okay. Anything to add to music, Ricky?
Not really. I mean, I have a selection of a lot of different music on a Spotify playlist that I've just generated from customers' recommendations. So, yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of different things from classical all the way through to kind of heavy metal in there. It just depends what people, because like Ed was saying, it's important that the customer listens to what they would listen to, and people have varying tastes.
Yep, good stuff.
Yep.
So if you, dear listener, have any demo music or films or discs or anything that we haven't mentioned here that you think we really should be looking at, or other people should be looking at to demonstrate on their systems or so on, then add them to the comments under this podcast, either on YouTube or on AVForums. And that's it for this week.
It's almost it. Just this is only going to take one sentence. Happy birthday to Kurt Russell, who is
indeed
today. He's 68 years old, which is not depressing at all. So there you go. Happy birthday to Kurt. Thanks for some absolutely cracking films and some enjoyably terrible ones as well.
Okay, good stuff. Happy birthday. And that's it for the podcast this week. By thanks to Steve Withers.
I love songs about extraterrestrial life, don't you?
Ed Selley.
I had a great evening. It was like the Nuremberg trials.
And Ricky Jennings.
Read the papers, half the country's doing it.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmark avforums.com for the latest reviews, news and videos, and of course leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, but only if you enjoyed the show. Also, head over and check out our YouTube channel for videos on the latest product releases and launches and reviews, and feel free to subscribe while you're there. I'm Phil Hinton, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.